Hi, everybody. Welcome. I can see there are sort of attendees just joining as we begin. And this is our Meaningful Outcomes in Substance Use Treatments NHMRC Centre of Research Excellence webinar that we do. And this week we're talking about working with people with lived and living experiences as researchers. So today's webinar is titled Nothing About Us Without Us. And our very own PhD student and trial coordinator at UOW, Elle Coleman, is going to be chairing today's session. She's got some presentation slides at the beginning, and then she's going to facilitate a panel discussion. So Elle, are you happy if I hand over to you and you run this show from here?
Sure. Thank you. And yeah, good afternoon, everyone. And really, thank you so much for joining this webinar. Today's webinar, as Bryony sort of said, is really an introduction and overview for researchers who want to work with people with lived and living experience, but might not really know where to start or what kinds of questions to ask or the things that you need to consider. So in sort of kicking this off, I'd really like to thank our lived and living experience panelists. So we've got Franny, Nigel and Kevin who have joined us today. They've really helped in contributing to this presentation. They've given their time and their knowledge, and they're very much going to be incredible when it comes to the Q&A session that'll follow. As a bit of an introduction to me and why I'm sort of doing this presentation today, my name is Elle Coleman. I'm in the process of finalising my PhD in psychology at the University of Wollongong. And during this time, I've worked as a student representative and lived experience advocate for survivors of sexual violence as part of UOW's Safe and Respectful Communities team. My predominant role right now, as Bryony said, is as an NHMRC funded trial coordinator on the Building Belonging project. And this project really assesses, the efficacy of a psychosocial loneliness intervention for people accessing alcohol and other drug treatment. To do this effectively, our team really works alongside people with lived experience of alcohol and other drug use in multiple capacities. So as research assistants and across a variety of advisory groups, one of which I co-chair. And the presentation today is really grounded in the knowledges provided by the panelists, in the work that I've done in collaboration with them and other lived experience people, and in my own experience as an advocate. But before we really start, I'd like to take this time to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which I work, live and play. So these are the Wadi people of the Dharawal Nation. And a lot of the work that I've done and the knowledges I've developed over time as a student have really been done on the beauty that is Dharawal country. And the images on this slide really encapsulate what living on Dharawal land means to me. So I'd like to again acknowledge the Wadi people of Dharawal country and extend that acknowledgement to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who may be joining us on this call today. But please feel free to add in the chat where each of you are calling in from. And importantly, I'd really like to recognise community before we start. So I'd like to recognise people with lived and living experience of alcohol and other drug use and mental ill health, and the important role they play in shaping research, policy, education services, and their improvement. I acknowledge that through their expertise, diverse experience and peer support, lives are saved and health outcomes are realised. I'd also like to recognise that those peers who came before us, the loved ones we've lost, and the impacts this can have on family, friends, and kin. Because this participation really does take courage. It gives voice to and helps reduce stigma and discrimination. So I really want to respect and value their generous contributions and acknowledge that without them, our work would be poorer. And then kind of leading into some of the key resources that have been used to develop this presentation. A lot of the information that I'm presenting here draws from really incredible frameworks and checklists that have been generated by the Community Mental Health, Drug and Alcohol Research Network in collaboration with their partners. I'll refer to them as CHIMDAN, and also the Ministry of Health. And shout out to Franny for her role in the development of the alcohol and other drug consumer engagement framework there as well. But in really sort of grounding this presentation to the heart of the people that we work with and do research on and for and with, lived experience advocacy, while empowering, is also entrenched in really deep vulnerability. This is because topics exploring mental health really do present challenging conversations around things like stigma, discrimination, trauma, and coercion. This is because this is about their lived experience and it involves a genuine, significant emotional investment from them. As an advocate, what you're really doing is you're putting your own vulnerability out there on a stage to be scrutinized and dissected and disentangled, often by people who mean really well and want to make a difference, but can sometimes forget that the discussions are entrenched within someone's pain. So in beginning this talk, I'd really like everyone in the room to sit with this idea of vulnerability and note that prioritizing emotional and psychological safety is really crucial when you're implementing research, no matter when and where you're engaging with anyone with lived experience. But working with people with lived experience has this history of epistemic injustice. And what this is unfairly treating someone in their capacity as a knower. So in this context, it really references the idea that academic knowledge is the only true form of knowledge, without considering the kinds of knowledges that can be brought to the fore when collaborating with people with lived experience on research projects. And psychological research really has a history of undervaluing or misinterpreting or excluding lived experience knowledge through a range of tokenistic gestures. So for example, as a single consultation that's only really used as a tick box exercise. And this includes things like, professional privileging. So when academic knowledge is treated as more valid or other knowledge is dismissed as non-credible or biased, in ways that we use language that might not be accessible to lived experience people, or otherwise using lived experience stories to inform research design without really recognizing where this has come from in the first place. But what's good about the way that we're moving forward now is that we're really attempting to move away from this, moving away from doing research work on behalf of people with lived experience and moving towards more meaningful participation of lived experience people across all stages of the research process. So from the very beginning, where a research question is collaboratively developed, all the way through to the ways in which we think about how to disseminate those findings. So where we're hopefully heading now is towards research approaches that support meaningful participation that reflects lived and living experience values like harm reduction, trauma-informed work, and removing ourselves from a purely medicalized lens and towards a holistic understanding of people and their experiences. So what does consumer engagement really look like in practice? So Chimdan have collated this really nice continuum of participatory research. And what you can kind of see on the yellow and orange ends of this spectrum is engagement that involves genuine partnership and collaboration with lived and living experience people. So this is where work is done with or otherwise done by people with lived experience. And each point on the end of this participatory research continuum is usually referenced as co-design, but there are some distinct nuances. So in the yellow, this work is often led by people with lived experience or peer researchers, and they work collaboratively across all stages of the research process to develop a piece of work. In co-production, the core piece of work is developed in a traditional research or lived experience format. And in traditional co-design, the aim is that project is co-developed with lived experience researchers from the point of development of the research question. But sort of more often than not, it's predominantly led by an academic team. And it doesn't always have a 50-50 split of traditional lived experience researchers. Sometimes co-design doesn't involve genuine involvement of lived experience researchers throughout that whole process, and sometimes it does. But that also speaks strongly to how varied engagement actually is and what it can look like, which is why there are a lot of different terms that encapsulate what participatory research looks like in practice. Sort of in the teal component of this spectrum is consumer engagement at the level of advisory groups and consultations. So this is where people with lived experience are consulted on or contribute to research, but they often have little real influence over the research process itself. So a common example of this is engaging a consumer advisory group to ask questions about, the language you use in your participant information sheets or appropriate methods of engagement when you're working with your participants. And this aspect of research is often the most common way that traditional researchers engage with people with lived experience. But in many instances, if it's not done right, it can be quite tokenistic. On the grey end, and this is the end of the spectrum that most people do when they're really kicking off with research, is working with lived experience people as subject participants. But I'd really just like to acknowledge that this continuum does look quite overwhelming. Getting to that gold and orange end of the spectrum isn't always feasible for a lot of people, particularly when we're just starting and we're only just learning about what research is. But despite that, it doesn't mean that the work most of us are doing more on this teal and grey end cannot be inherently meaningful. Because this is a lot of what we're doing right now. It's a lot of what I'm doing right now as well. And where the learnings I've developed by sitting with people with lived experience stem from. So there is an opportunity, no matter what point you are on this continuum of participatory research, to understand what meaningful engagement with people with lived experience looks like, and to enhance the knowledges we develop by working together. But in order to do that well, we really need to understand, what is the difference between co-design work and what's the difference between participatory action work, and how can I utilize the methods that I use in a meaningful way so that we develop our understanding of how to work together well, and what this means for the way that we can, improve outcomes for people that we really want to be working with. So it's just sort of a broad overview. True co-design is where lived experience researchers work in partnership with conventional researchers across all stages of the research cycle. So this is where lived experience researchers have experience relevant to the area of work. They're often employed as part of the research team with a good living wage. Decision making across all aspects of the research cycle is shared and equitable, and there's often a 50-50 split between conventional or traditional researchers and lived experience researchers. What's really good about this approach as well is that lived experience perspectives are privileged, and the power differentials between a traditional researcher and a lived experience researcher is addressed, so that lived experience perspectives can be brought forward in a way that can be meaningful and useful for understanding what is it that this project's doing, and how is it going to inform what we know about people and how we can help people moving forward. So really the mindset of co-design is about engaging in collective and creative approaches that move away from being reliant on text-based or academic ways of thinking and communicating, and allowing new knowledge to surface. On the other end of this spectrum is participatory action research, which looks more like consultation on core components of the research process, hopefully across all stages of the research cycle, but more often than not during key stages. So when you're trying to define and figure out what it is that you're doing, or you're trying to figure out ways to disseminate things properly. So this usually involves people being consulted at least once, or typically multiple times, to gain advice on a research area or design. And when you're engaging with people with lived experience, they may be considered researchers. Other times they might be considered as advisors, but they have limited power to influence the research design and conduct overall. Ongoing input isn't guaranteed, but typically does happen during active stages of the research process. But what's key here is it's the conventional researcher that is the expert and owner of the study itself. So a key issue really isn't that this is what we're doing predominantly, but that people are often conflating co-design with participatory action research. So it's really important to distinguish between the kinds of work that you're doing and make considerations for how to make that more inherently meaningful. But we're only just understanding how to do that, how to work meaningfully and safely with people with lived experience. So as I venture into considerations for how to do this, I'd really like you to hold in mind the kinds of work that you do in research right now. What are the kinds of designs that you use, and what do they mean for the people you're engaging with as participants, for example? How might you have consulted with lived experience or consumer advisory groups on the stuff that you're working on right now? How is the work that you're doing already addressing some of these things, and how might adding some more sort of considerations into the work that you're currently doing make it more meaningful and produce better outcomes that are more person-centered? So how can we ensure meaningful and safe partnership when working with lived and living experience people in research? So there's this really nice trimmed down checklist that goes through some 7 core considerations for what this looks like. So this includes building trust and establishing a safe environment, establishing group norms, clarifying roles and expectations, ensuring emotional and psychological safety, ensuring financial and professional respect, protecting well-being, and also assessing suitability. So I'll go through each of these in turn and kind of make it in reference to, working with people as participants or working with them across consumer advisory groups, and what this could look like. So in the first instance, building trust and establishing a safe environment is very important. And I guess to this first point, really understanding what the driving imperative for the research is in the first place is a really good place to start. So what are the values that drive your team or the work that you do? Was it through talking to people across other research projects that helped develop the design that you have? Why are you doing this in the first place? And what kinds of outcomes will you develop that enriches understanding or meaningful outcomes in psychological treatment, for example? Because a research question can rarely be answered without the voices of the people, and those voices need to be privileged no matter what your engagement type is. For people who do consultations or work with advisory groups, promoting equitable participation from everyone where you can is really important. So this includes having involvement of lived experience voices across all stages of the research process, more than just once, and including a diverse array of people so that the knowledges that you develop are as holistic as they possibly can be within the context of the work that you do. When it really sort of comes to communication, this one can be really tricky depending on the context of your work. So there are certain words that are used in research and in daily life that are really rooted in entrenched ideologies that might not actually reflect lived experience values. So finding language guides that are specific to your research area can be a really helpful first start. In alcohol and other drug research, in suicide research, in working with people with histories of childhood trauma, there are nuances in the words that are used that can really help make people feel accepted. But then there are other words that can be quite stigmatizing. So really kind of keeping that in mind and looking for language guides specific to your area can be a really good way that makes people feel safe and establishes trust. In the second instance, establishing group norms is quite important when you're working with advisory groups or you're doing consultations. So you really kind of need an initial orientation session. So you're establishing, what is it that I can expect? What is it that they can expect? What is everyone's responsibility? Are there safety protocols in place to ensure that safety is maintained? What's everyone's roles? Establishing that in the first instance really allows people to have ownership over the whole process if it's happened collaboratively. So everybody's at the table and on the same page at the same time. Routine check-ins are good because norms change. You never know, something might work and then you'll have to shift it later. But if everyone's on the same page with what this looks like, this can be really helpful. And having a document to refer back to can be really good for people to say, no, wait, we said we were going to do it this way. And then having transparent conversations around why changes might have happened can really kind of help foster that trust as well. It's also okay to mess this up. So when, in my sort of experience co-chairing a consumer advisory group, there was a very kind of key time for me where I jumped into a meeting just expecting it to be more like a casual catch up with university colleagues and zero expectations, but that was just not on. It ended up leading into really robust and uncontrolled discussions that led people to feel really unsafe and uncertain about what their role was, what it was we were doing in the first place, and what that meant for everybody. But what was really good about this is there's an opportunity for repair. There's an opportunity for you as the conventional researcher to learn what is it that I did wrong and how can I move forward to make this better for everybody. So Franny, Kevin, Nigel were present at that time too, and they provided me with some really excellent ways to move forward. What are the things that I have to consider that ensure psychological safety? How can we develop certain rules that make sure that everybody's sitting on the same page at the same time? So what I really learned from that was messing it up in the first instance and focusing on how to collectively move forward together really improve the dynamic and the subsequent work that we produce together, which I know I'm personally quite proud of. In terms of speaking about clarifying roles and expectations, why do we need to do this? I mean, if you just think about how you engage in a work environment, knowing where you fit, what you're able to contribute, and where the boundaries lie and what that looks like for you keeps you feeling safe and heard and understood and valued. And it goes the same way when it comes to working with participants, working with people in consumer advisory groups, all the way through to co-design. So this looks like making sure everyone understands what engagement type is. Is this a co-design project? Is this a consumer engagement project? Is this a one-off consultation? Collaboratively deciding together what this might look like, having, again, transparent decision-making around why were these roles developed in the first place? Why is it just a consumer advisory group? Why can't we, move into some co-design work and providing explanations for these things? Everybody needs a why. So just centering that's really important. In terms of co-design and participatory action research, this work takes time. It requires a lot of planning from you as conventional research to take 5 steps back and realize, okay, collaboration looks different in an academic context than it does in a lived experience context. So what are the other things I need to consider about how people can come to the table with you in a way that works for them? So do you need a 2-week turnaround time between reviewing different documents? Do you need to provide people with stepped level explanations of, hey, I would like advice on this specific thing for this reason? And so working with people to figure out what that looks like can be really, really helpful. And then this all comes down to emotional and psychological safety as well. So we're often kind of okay with this when we work with research participants because our ethics committees are really just getting on top of us to make sure, do your participants have support if something goes wrong? How can you make sure that support is there? It does. And then just remembering as well that this is the life experience of someone they're bringing to the table and working with you. This is vulnerability, and experiences are brought forward in these conversations that sometimes might require additional support. So, making sure that that support's available in terms of maybe looking at more of the organizational processes and providing assistance of what that looks like. Being on top of what the expectations are from the entire research group in the first place, and being transparent about that with the people you're working with lived experience is really sort of a key consideration. So this again involves providing flexibility, being prepared, having regular check-ins to make sure everyone's still on the same page, and if they're not, why has that deviation occurred? But we need to do this in a balanced way. So if you're over checking in, it's going to seem demeaning, it's going to seem patronizing, and that's what it looks like when it's overdone. So really respecting everyone's autonomy is important, but providing avenues for support just needs to be there as well. An additional aspect of meaningful and safe partnership also includes financial and professional respect. Traditionally, universities say, hey, give them a gift card, this is enough. And we're starting to realize that that's truly not the case. People's expertise need to be valued financially in a way that you would value someone's academic expertise as well, which includes remunerating people properly. There are some really good guidelines, depending on your research area or the context you work in, that shows you how much money per hour does someone need to be paid for contributing their time, and what does that include? Universities now are starting to realize that you can pay people directly into their bank account for their time. So on the project I work on, we do that with participants. We also do that with our lived experience advisors across our consumer advisory groups. Because otherwise gift cards and other tokens really just seem tokenistic and don't really show that you value the time and expertise that people with lived experience are putting forward. But this also includes acknowledging lived experience as invaluable when you are, publishing your work, acknowledging people on publications, in conference presentations, in the reports that you do, and the knowledges that they've brought forward in order for that work to be produced in the first place. Giving lived experience people an opportunity to do the conference presentations themselves, to provide opportunities for them to jump on a panel and say, hey, this is my experience and this is what it looked like for me. Which means that you, a lot of the time, might need to sit with discomfort to understand, oh crap, maybe there's not something I'm doing as well as I could. But that, that level of humility that we have allows us to learn about the world in ways that we probably couldn't get from a textbook. On the last note as well, if anyone is interested in working with people with lived experience and needs to figure out how to pay them properly, come and chat to me, send me an email if that's something you need to do. And I guess sort of summarizing how to protect well-being as well, it kind of speaks to the points of psychological safety from a couple of slides earlier. But these considerations are more around how can we align the expectations of everybody to ensure that all information is shared transparently. So this includes planning for these things, what are some of the organizational things to consider? And, is the culture of the academic workplace, for example, in alignment with the lived experience values, and how can we provide enough information about that so the people that you work with, the lived experience people you're working with, have enough knowledge to make an informed choice about whether they want to engage with you in the first place. And in bringing the idea and the concept of well-being together, and I know I've said this a few times, but I'll repeat it again, this quote is really sort of lovely and encapsulates this. So for you, this is a topic of interest to be dissected or measured, written about. But for me, this is real. This is my life, my history, and the impacts are real. They shape who I am, and sometimes they're painful. A final consideration on this checklist as well is about assessing suitability. So while we want to be inclusive as much as we can be, inclusivity also involves equitability, and there will be points where people who are interested in working with you might not be suitable to engage in the work you hope to do. But on the other hand, the work that you're doing might not align well with the values of the people you're hoping to engage with. And this is often the case with research participants as well. But this also is the case when you're trying to establish a consumer advisory group or you're seeking consultation in the first place. So I guess the things to consider are, people can't make an informed choice about involvement if they don't know what they're getting involved with in the first place from a holistic sort of perspective in terms of values and skills. So, creating expressions of interests or position descriptions that have been collaboratively developed so that lived experience considerations can be put forward in what the roles and expectations are of the work that you hope to do together can be really helpful. And navigating a no can be a bit tricky, but it's a part of the process. So if applicants aren't the right fit, consider how to communicate this respectfully and explore offering other options for future collaboration if that's a possibility. And a final point as well that I don't think is covered as well in this checklist is the real importance of feedback and closing off. So feedback and closing off looks like, what was it that people with lived experience said to me about the work that I'm doing, about how to improve this work, about the considerations that we need to take on board when engaging in this work? How are those voices then implemented in practice? What did I do? How was it done? How is that taken on board by the participants, for example, or sort of other stakeholders you're working with? And then taking this all together, consider how did lived experience voices inform procedure and practice? And then feed that back. Send a big email and say, hey, I know I only met with you once, but thank you so much for your help. You told me all of these things. This is how they were implemented and this is how they were taken on board. Your time was really, really valuable and thank you so much. The feedback I've gotten from Nigel, Kevin, Franny a lot of the time is that across a lot of projects, they don't get that feedback. And when that feedback isn't there, it leaves people feeling stuck. Did I contribute anything worthwhile? Did these people already make their mind up in the first place and I'm just a tick box exercise so they can get more money from a funding body? And even when you think about it in terms of the way that you work with participants on research projects, they might think as well, oh, I did that research project once. I wonder what happened with that. So finding ways to really, distribute and disseminate the knowledges that you gain from the research project too in a way that's understandable by the people that you did, you collected data from is going to be so helpful to make sure that the work that you do is meaningful and really informs the way that everybody understands the sort of research question that you wanted to address in the first place. This makes things a lot more person-centered and a lot more meaningful. But you might have also just been hearing me say all of this and be like, I'm just a baby. It's my first day. How am I supposed to do any of this? No one's going to pay me any money. I don't even know where to get money from in the first place. What door do I knock on? So I've kind of done a little bit of digging and had a look at, potential considerations for, the baby researchers, the new people starting PhDs, the people who might just be considering thinking about research of, what is it that I could do feasibly to try and move away a little bit from the grey and into the blue. So if you're working in a larger team, maybe consider what does consumer engagement look like in terms of a larger budget you're developing for a grant that your team might be working on, and how might consumer engagement really look meaningfully when we're developing a project idea. In terms of people who are just like finishing their PhDs, maybe looking at, university type funding or seed funding, which usually looks like smaller pools of money that are used for pilot studies. So you can dip your toe in a little bit there with a bit of financial support so you can make sure that you're paying people for their time. And then there is HDR funding that you can use for this purpose too. For people at UOW, Bryony's our HDR rep. She says you can do it. So, you know, go off on that. And for anyone who's calling in from other universities or institutions, have a look at what your HDR funding could look like for your project and how lived experience engagement can be implemented as a part of that. And then the next thing is, but who would want to give me money in the first place? Is like the next sort of consideration that I'd have. So it sort of goes back to the point I made when we first saw this continuum. Consider what meaningful consumer engagement as part of your current research practice actually looks like. So in terms of your research design, is it going to be meaningful for the participants? Is the information you're getting from the types of designs that you're using going to be helpful for, you know, furthering knowledge and understanding people? Is it safe for them? How are you using information that people are providing for you? How are you feeding this back? Is it accessible? Is it consumer friendly? And am I considering all of these things before I even start trying to kick off a research project in the first place? And I guess in closing this first part of the presentation and getting into the cool stuff, which is the question and answer session, I just really wanted to highlight this really lovely thing Nigel said as we sat together to prepare this presentation, where Nigel said, my lived experience is just as valuable as your academic experience, and that's how we can work together to create better outcomes. So thank you for listening to the first sort of part of this webinar. Hopefully it gave you something to think about and ways I guess we can all move forward together in making our engagement and research more meaningful when we work with people with lived experience. But moving into introducing you to the panelists. So I think, I'm not sure if you've got your cameras on, everyone, but we've got Franny. So Franny's been working as a consumer advisor across co-design and other projects in research and in government for over 15 years. Franny's got an extensive lived experience and has provided the most incredible knowledge bases across, you know, government and non-government services, and in working with my team at UOW in research. And Kev, very similar, like Kev's a bit of a big dog in consumer advisory work across New South Wales, and he's done a lot of stuff with government, non-government research agencies, collaborates on a lot of research projects and provides training across universities for people like us who want to know how can we do this better in a person-centered way. And Nigel is, you know, a social work champion, has been, you know, really working with people to help support sustainable housing and reduce homelessness for people who are, you know, really trying to find their way. Nigel as well has worked extensively across research projects and government and non-government agencies. And as Nigel and Kev told me just before they started, they've done a lot of panels, so that's not their first rodeo. And Franny's been in the same boat too in terms of some of the work that she's done at other academic conferences and other things. And they've really sort of made a huge difference to my life and my understanding of what it means to engage in meaningful research. So thank you so much for your time, and yeah, thank you for being here.
So Elle, just to flag, I think Kevin might have dropped off, but
Kevin,
he'll join us, I'm sure, when he can.
Okay.
If you want to proceed with having a chat with Francine and with Nigel, that would be great.
Absolutely. Thanks, Bryony. Bryony's all over the chats and the videos. I don't know what's going on. I'm struggling to find my buttons. All right, we might move forward then. Bryony, I might get you to start first. Did you want to briefly introduce yourself? And the question, I guess, for you is, why do you think it's meaningful to include lived and living experience perspectives in the development of research?
Hi everyone. Hi Elle. It's been a real pleasure to work on this project with you, as well as with Kev and Nigel. What do I think is really meaningful, why it is to include our perspective, is because if we want to make changes in the future for health, and we want people to have that that experience of working with people with lived experiences, and in research it's really important because we need to look at all the different perspectives coming across from people, and engaging people from the start of the project till the end of the project is really important. We offer unique perspectives, things that maybe aren't thought about in the academic world. I think that as was expressed by by Elle, was that our time is valuable because we do have a lot of lived experience, and we can work together collaboratively to make the changes we want to see in the future. And research I love so much, and I attend lots of different things for research. There were some wonderful people from all over the universities at a thing that I opened the other day for Assess CR, which is part of Dr. Janelle Bowden's program that she organised a year ago to award researchers for the stuff that they do. So I got to open that, and it was a really great thing. And I was told that I didn't have to stay on, but because I find research so interesting and the perspectives of researchers, I decided to stay on. So it was really wonderful. And I think, don't think we're just here for this reason to do this and get paid. We're here because we want to see the changes come through. We don't want to be living back then. We want to see things move forward and done in a way that is meaningful all round. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Franny. And how about you, Nigel?
Yeah, welcome everybody. I guess for me it's similar. I'm a social worker in the Hunter Valley, as discussed, but for me, I come from extensive lived experience, and I guess for me, I went back to study myself because I also have that academic knowledge as well as lived experience, because at the time I thought that's the only way people are going to take me serious. And the shift is now changing that it's really important, and the co-design to work together. So I guess why I think this is meaningful comes down to this, that balance of both the combination of lived experience and academic experience has created the best outcomes, just due to diversity within the group, and different opinions and different histories and different backgrounds. And that's what good co-design really is about, is bringing that diversity into the group to try and create different ideas for better outcomes. And I guess at the end of the day, we all are here to, I would hope so, create better outcomes for people we are supporting. And that's why we do this work. So I think it's really important that we just gain as much knowledge, as information as we can from any aspect and any source we can, in order to create, broaden our horizons and improve our scope of knowledge, creating better outcomes and better skill bases and better skill sets. And I think at the end of the day, to understand how, the target group, the target cohort we're trying to represent or we're trying to work with, it's important to know how they think. Otherwise, how do we build rapport? How do we engage? And engagement is critical if we want to create better outcomes. You can't change someone if they're not prepared to change themselves. And if they have a healthy, safe environment where they feel that it is safe to change, if they feel they're included, and if they feel they're valued, that's when we create positive change, because we get good engagement and good rapport. And I guess for Franny as well, like, we don't do this for the money. We do it because we're passionate about making change for the colleagues and others who have come before us, and those that come going forward, in the future. And hopefully this does create better opportunities and better outcomes for people with lived experience. No one chooses to be an addict. Unfortunately, situations create that. So we need to treat everybody equally in a non-judgmental space if we want to, engage people. So yeah, that's a quick introduction to my thoughts.
Thanks, Nige. And welcome back, Kevin. What are your thoughts on this question?
Look, if I'm sitting at the table or I've filled out a response to an EOI that's sort of come around a research question, I'm at the table because I want to be there. I believe that my lived experience will help you develop a better product for a description of what your question is. Look, I have an interest in several topics, and as I said, if I'm sitting at the table, I'll help you develop a better product to enable your research to get to the guts of it, so to speak. And like, I can only back up what Franny and Nigel said. We're there because we want to be there. We're not there for the money. It's nice to be paid. It's nice to have your lived experience recognised and the value of it. Basically, if we're sitting at the tables, we want to be there. We want to help. We want to do the best we can to enable you to answer your research questions.
Nice. Thanks, Kev. And just because we are TikTok running out of time a little bit, I might share the questions across the rest of the panelists. So take the floor for the rest of the questions if someone wants to answer it more than others. So I guess one of you can sort of take this question if you'd like. Do advisory groups for studies actually work, and what makes a good one? Oh, Franny's like me. All right, go on.
Well, I am part of other advisory groups. However, I do think they are good, but I think that in saying that, you actually need to be very transparent with the people and what you want to achieve from it. So, and good advisory groups are where people feel safe and they feel safe enough to say their piece and to have their voices heard. And it's done in a way where we celebrate diversity amongst our opinions and things like that, because we can't all think the same. And somebody might come from left field and say something right out there, but at the same time, it's still part of what we're trying to achieve. We all have. That's what makes it strong. If we get advisory groups and make those people feel like they can speak, they can, help, but also for studies and things like that. I think it's important to, if you're going to go through a CAG or a community action group or something, you advise them about what your intentions are. Like you said, being very transparent around that. It gives the people an opportunity, then that way to decide, and I think because a lot of research that comes from advisory groups and things, you have that option in your EOI to opt out at any time. So I think it's good, but I also think that lived and living experience perspective, and actually researchers seeking that for a particular thing through their EOI is a good way.
Thanks, Franny. And then just moving forward for time purposes, is there anyone who wants to take this question? So what are some of the things that make involvement in research more meaningful and enjoyable for you? Is there a project in particular that you really enjoyed working on?
Yeah, it's Kevin here. Look, I'm going to give your project a plug, the Build Belonging one.
Thanks,
what made
Kev.
it really meaningful for me was I felt included. Questions were asked of what I could bring, and I asked questions about what was needed from me. I was made to feel comfortable. I was included in the group, and it comes from people who've lived and living experience right through to sort of academic researchers and stuff. And while sitting at the table, I felt part of a team. I didn't feel like I was an add-on. Let's tag along this sort of lived and living experience person to tick a box. It was about being included, and it was I was made to feel quite comfortable.
Thank you. That's really kind. I don't know what to do with my hands now, but that is the goal.
Yeah, I'll quickly just
go on
and add to that what Kevin said. I was also involved in the Belonging Project, and that for me was a massive shift in some of the other work I've done in the past. There was a number of groups and committees I sat on in the earlier days within the Ministry of Health. Just top heavy with academics and with, obviously high-powered people in the ministry, and I didn't feel really like included. So if you don't feel that, then you start to, this is probably leading to the next question, what barriers, yeah? What a great
Actually,
segue.
yeah, you know what? Lead into the next question.
What a great segue. And I think that if we don't feel like we're valued and don't feel like we're included, I think then we shut down and we don't provide the information which is really needed to have those quality outcomes and quality groups and quality information to do the best work we can. And I guess going back to the building belonging, we were informed from the start. We were it was outlined what our role was, what our interest was, what the project's all about, and we were kept informed the whole way along. And it was a very, very transparent group, and it was a great shift on how this work, this co-design should be done. And our importance was, our lived experience was valued just as much as every person on the team sat at the table as an equal. And I think that was why the project worked so well. And saying that going back to, there's been times where I felt that I'm just an add-on here, and I don't really, my value, my knowledge is not really included, but we're ticking the box, and then you just shut down. So I think that is the biggest barrier. I think the biggest barrier is being non-judgmental, and allowing everybody the opportunity to have their say and bring what they need to come to the table. And that's, I think, that the biggest barrier for me is not being judged and not really being heard.
Yeah. Oh, Franny wants to add on to that one.
I just wanted to say that we have to account for First Nations people here as well, with barriers and things like that. So when we are engaging or wanting to engage with First Nations people, called people, or diverse people, then we need to be extremely transparent, but we also need to understand those cultural things and have that safety there, provide cultural safety, provide inclusion, those things. I actually felt this particular project that I've worked in with you wonderful people has been one of the best projects I've ever worked in, because we had, like you mentioned, Elle, we had a few little barriers at the beginning, but we worked through those things really, really well. And we just kind of, from there, we just kept moving forward, and no one was too scared to not say and contribute to this wonderful project. We were all so very, very keen, and we felt, well, I can only speak on my behalf, but I felt extremely listened to by you guys, and I think that's credit to you, and you've done the job well done. Thank you.
Thanks, Franny. And Nigel, you wanted to add something else onto this point? Oh, sorry, Kevin. Oh my gosh, I was looking at the wrong hand.
Kevin's raring to go.
I'll just lower my hand. Look, this is a personal thing, and one of the things that sort of keeps me from putting my hand up a lot is that self-stigma that can sit on my shoulder at times, and that little voice says you've got nothing to offer, and you're just an ex-drug user and so forth. But being made comfortable, having a clear role and clear design parameters for what my role is going to be and what's required of me has enabled me to sort of move away from that sort of self-stigmatizing attitude that I can carry. And speaking to other people, I know that they suffer from that as well. And it's just something to be aware of. Give us clear, defined roles, what's expected from us, and include us in everything, because there might be aspects of the research project that we don't even realise that we've got input into.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. For me also, when we first started doing this work, we get this imposter syndrome. I don't know if other people feel that, but we certainly feel it, and we certainly feel that, oh, gee, am I, is my information, is my knowledge, am I good enough to be in this group? So I guess that's the important thing, to be able to make people with lived experience feel very welcome, because they are suffering some anxiety. They are suffering some imposter syndrome. What am I doing here with all these people who are, academic, and I'm just, had a bit of an addiction. So I guess that's important, to be able to really reiterate that. Yeah, it's hard for us as well. You know what I mean? And acknowledge that fact that it's not easy for us, and we need to, and the more validation and the more acknowledgement and the less stigma can really help us to bring the best out of us and create best outcomes for projects which are involved in.
Absolutely. Thank you. Right. Oh, it's a good segue into this, actually. So someone mentioned, I sometimes worry that I'm not experienced enough to consult people with lived and living experience. What could I do to skill myself up? Does anyone have any thoughts?
Before we earlier on in the in this Zoom meeting, there was that CMHARDN was mentioned. They have some very good advice on researchers that wanting to work with people with lived experience. There's also a bit of a guide there for lived and living experience people who want to work with researchers. And the topics she touches on is, prepare for a co-design project, how to navigate the power dynamics, protecting your emotional and psychological safety, how to contribute to the positive co-design. And we've talked about this before, is the whole closure thing of research, like involve us right till the very end. Let us see your end product and so forth like that, because then it validates what we've been sitting at the table for.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really add to that as well. So we want to be involved from the start of the project to the finish of the project. And I guess for someone, researchers that are worried if they're not experienced enough to consult people with lived experience, I think, skill yourself up. I think just be human and be yourself. I don't think that there's a lot to skill yourself up in regards to just conduct the meeting as you would any other person. Don't try and have any stigma, and just be engaging as you would with any other person you have a conversation with. We're not, we're not these scary, crazy people who have these raging drug addictions anymore. We're people who have lived in life through trauma and through coping mechanisms, and we've learnt from that also. And that's why we give back and do the work that we do. And so I guess just be, my best skill yourself up is just be yourself and just talk on a normal level and connect with people, and that's what works for me.
That's it. And Franny, I think you had your hand up first.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate what Nigel said and what Kev said. Sometimes Kev, you're right. Self-stigmatization can hold us back from things. I totally agree with that. I'm speaking what Kev said, Nigel said. No, we're not scary, and we actually, you might please just talk to us like you would your friend or your dad, your mum, whatever. We're not scary people, and you might actually find that we are extremely just as passionate as you are to get your project happening and make it, work. So just keep us involved from the very, very start to the very end, and even beyond that, when things are still moving and evolving. Always keep us involved. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Franny. And Kev, you had an add-on there?
Yeah, just another thing is allow yourself to make mistakes. We're all human. We all do things incorrectly. We all use incorrect language at times. Just be aware of your mistakes you make and learn from them, because it's been a learning process of mine. I slipped up there. I'll file that away not to do it again. As Franny and Nigel said, we're just human beings. We're pretty tough characters at times, and involve us from the very beginning to the very end.
Yeah, I love that, Kev. 100%. That it's about, we're all going to make mistakes. We all make mistakes. We're not perfect. We all have good and bad days, or situations which are going on in our lives. But if you make a mistake, well, so be it. Let's just learn from it and go forward. So I think that's a really valid point, Kev.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, that was my experience as well. Just really being sort of humbled in a room full of beautiful and understanding people when I messed things up, and finding a way to collaborate to move forward in a way that was safe and meaningful and incredible for all of us. And we developed a really good piece of work out of it, I think.
Yeah.
And I guess as we're coming to the end of the hour, so I might just have an open-ended question of, is there anything else that you want to say to the room of people who really want to work with people with lived experience but haven't really done it before?
Give it a go. You'll be surprised what the results you'll achieve.
Yeah, just reach out to us because, like I said, sometimes you might find we're just as keen as what you are. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I understand. That's what I would obviously say as well, 100%. That we are just as keen to be involved in all these projects, not because we just want to see better outcomes for the people that have come before us, and better outcomes for people going forward. It's been a sector which within the health within the health and with society in general, there is all this unconscious bias of people who have addiction, and within the health setting there is a lot of stigma. So if we can just, the more we interact, the more we become, like, it's okay, we're just doing this together, the better outcomes we're going to have. So I think, just try and treat us as equals, be involved, and that's the way we can all go forward and create better outcomes.
Unreal. That's a really great way to end this panel session, I think. Thank you so much, Nigel, Franny, and Kev, for your time and your expertise in developing this presentation and in the question and answer session. And my heart feels very happy, and I'll be spending the rest of the afternoon in a very good mood. Thank you. Thanks to this conversation. Thank you as well to the Mo CRE for hosting this webinar, and I hope everybody took something valuable from some of the conversations from today. And Franny, I think you got something else you want to add to this?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, please, Elle told you before to reach out to her and Bryony. So please do that, because we're only too happy as lived experience people to engage in research. So please reach out to us. Yep, anytime. And just reach out to Elle and Bryony as well if you have any questions, because they've got it stitched up. Thank you.
Thanks, Franny. Thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
See ya.
See you, Nigel.
Don't want to go.